You're listening to Gaming Buzz, your source for information and entertaining discussions about video games for video game enthusiasts. With your hosts, Jacob, Darien, and Christian, all huge nerds who can never have too many games. Now, let's get this started.
Hello, and welcome to episode 2 of Gaming Buzz. I'm Jacob, and I'm here with Christian.
Hello.
And Darien.
Hey.
Christian, Darien, and I were discussing the Wii U and how it recently turned 3 years old, and how it generally is considered a commercial failure. And while that made us kind of sad, we all had different reasons why we felt it was a failure. And because of that, we decided to make an episode talking about video game consoles and why they failed.
Let's get started. Let's talk about the Wii U first. Christian, what are your thoughts?
My thoughts on the Wii U? Well, I think the reason it really didn't do well is because of the game marketing. I really didn't get into the Wii U till this year because of Mario Maker. You know, a game that actually really uses the Wii U how it's supposed to be, like the gamepad and the screen, and also Splatoon and Mario Kart. But besides that, I really haven't gotten into the Wii U besides that. Like it wasn't really in my radar to buy it.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of the developers didn't quite know how to use the Wii U because most of the time you'd have your TV displaying the same image that was on the gamepad, and I felt like it was a lazy attempt to try to use that. And also the name Wii U, trying to reuse the Wii name really confused a lot of consumers.
Yeah, when it first was announced, I wasn't sure if it was a new console or if it was just an extra peripheral for the Wii.
I had that kind of idea at first, thinking, hey, there's something new coming out for the Wii, but then I read it deeper into it and I found it was a new console.
Right. And it doesn't help that when they were first showing tech videos of it, they only showed off the tablet. So we didn't see anything about the full system or anything like that. So all we thought it was a tablet.
And the console itself doesn't really have that good of storage in it. It only comes with 8 and 32 gigabytes of storage options.
Yeah, and compare that to the PlayStation 3, which at launch had 60 gigabytes available, or even 80, depending on which model you bought. That's pretty pathetic.
Especially in 2012.
You know, one of the biggest problems right now, back in E3 when they announced Xenoblade Chronicles X, the problem right now that people are having is it pretty much takes all the storage of your Wii U if you have a 32 gigabyte. But if you have an 8 gigabyte, there's no way you can really play the game because you got to download some packs first if you're buying a physical version, unless you're buying the digital version that comes with everything. You can't really install it on an 8 gig, but if you have an external hard drive, then you can still play it.
Yeah, it's a problem that I'm having with my Wii U is that it's pretty much all downloadable content taking up my hard drive, and I don't have room for these big titles that are deciding to roll out late in the Wii U's life.
One thing that bothers me is third party. We haven't really seen a lot of third party. Well, we have a little bit, but not a lot like the PlayStation 3 or Xbox 360 or even the one or PS4.
When Nintendo first pitched the Wii U, they said it was going to be a middle-of-the-road console that's going to have broad appeal, and they're going to grab all the third-party publishers and make sure they're all publishing games on the system. And you can get every game that would be available at the same time on other consoles on the Wii U. And that's just not happening. And even if games do get multi-platform releases on the Wii U, they're normally just really bad ports of the Xbox 360 version.
When they do that, usually the tablet doesn't really get used. Most of the time it's just for like, oh, here's your map, it's in the tablet, or here's where your items are at.
And when the system launched too, it didn't have the strongest launch titles either.
That's true. Most of the launch titles for the system were either shovelware games that no one really had any interest in, or they were third-party releases that had already been released 2 to 3 years beforehand on other systems. Like Mass Effect 3 or Batman Arkham City.
Or Nintendo Land.
Ooh. And one of the worst things at the launch was that the Super Mario Bros. Game that comes with every system as a launch title that always sells tons of units really wasn't that great this time around. It was New Super Mario Bros. U, which is basically New Super Mario Bros. Wii, but in HD.
And this time around, it felt a little bit more neutered than the other versions that have come out in the past.
It felt like if you actually added DLC to the original game as like a expansion pack all by itself. That's how it felt like.
And it definitely was not a blockbuster hit.
It was too easy.
I actually preferred the Super Luigi U that came with it. That was actually more fun to play than the base game itself, because that actually had the challenge that I was looking for a Mario game. Instead, it was a Luigi game.
And next we're going to move to the GameCube, which is another Nintendo console that didn't do the greatest.
Up until recently, the GameCube was considered one of Nintendo's biggest failures, but I think the Wii U has now taken its spot. Despite both systems being critically acclaimed as two of the greatest systems ever released, with really good games.
Yeah, the GameCube finally got passed up by sales of the Wii U. But even though the GameCube was sold at $99 price point, it didn't grasp the consumers like they thought it would.
Yeah, if I could buy one of the most powerful systems on the market nowadays for $99, you bet I would be. You know, the GameCube had a wonderful library of games, both third-party and first-party, but it never really caught on with the mainstream market due to it appearing to be a very kiddish console, despite having some very adult games like Resident Evil 4 on it.
Which I would consider one of the greatest Resident Evils ever created. I think another reason that the games didn't really take off on the system is because developers had such a hard time to make multi-platforms for it. So you had games like Need for Speed Underground 2, for an example, which is usually an 8 GB file, but they had to try to cram it on the little GameCube disc that only had 1.5 GB of storage on it. So lots of the games didn't appear to look the best, or they didn't run too smooth because of how much space they lacked.
And you know, another reason is because the PlayStation 2 was very popular back then. Like, I had a PS2 and I didn't know the GameCube existed at all. As soon as I saw a GameCube, because I was really into Mario games, I was like, oh cool, Super Mario Sunshine and all that. There really wasn't a Mario title to begin with at the beginning of the GameCube's launch time.
That's right, the GameCube was the only Nintendo system to not launch with a Mario game. Instead, they launched it with Luigi's Mansion, which, although it's an excellent game, did not have the appeal that a traditional 3D, 2D platforming Mario game has.
It kind of took on the kiddish approach to kind of a survival horror game, which is kind of hilarious and a very Nintendo thing to do.
But overall, I think the biggest reason the GameCube did not do so well was the fact that it did not have a DVD player.
This is the time when lots of console developers were boasting, hey, we have DVD capabilities. And Nintendo just was like, here's our little lunchbox.
The GameCube's biggest competitors, the Xbox and the PS2, both had DVD support. And even the Dreamcast had support for CDs, which the GameCube didn't even have. And back then, having support to watch your videos and play your games on the same console was amazing and a big seller, whereas nowadays it's not as big of a thing due to streaming. I mean, the Wii did not have DVD support, and no one complained about that.
It's a very good Netflix machine nowadays.
And you know, it's funny, Nintendo hasn't yet made a console that is compatible with DVDs or CDs.
There hasn't been a single Nintendo console that lets you watch a movie from physical media.
Yeah, and the only other way you could really watch video was either from YouTube or the internet browser.
Or you would have to mod your console, but that's not recommended.
You know, Darien, you called the GameCube a lunchbox, and that's quite funny. I always wondered why they put a handle on the back of the thing.
Me too. It always gets in the way when I'm trying to put it in shelves, and when you try to put it flush with the back of the shelves, it just doesn't want to do that. It either sits at a weird angle or something.
I always imagine Nintendo executives in 2000 going, it's okay, people will carry their GameCubes around with them on the streets, just like people did in the 80s with boomboxes.
You could buy a LAN adapter, so you're probably thinking, oh, let's bring our GameCubes to our friends' houses so we can play Mario Kart Double Dash with multiple TVs in their house.
But overall, the handle just gets in the way all the time. I mean, if I had the technical knowledge to do it, I would cut the handle off, sand it down, and make it so it never existed on my GameCube.
Gaming Buzz. We're gonna need a whole lot of lives.
We are going to take a quick break from the discussion to bring you the Gaming Buzz news update. A lot of information has surfaced recently about virtual reality technology. Sony held a special panel on virtual reality gaming on Saturday, December 5th at their PlayStation Experience Expo in San Francisco, California. This panel was set up to discuss how VR will make its mark on gaming. Sony is planning to release their VR headset in 2016. Sony's competitor, Microsoft, also showed off their augmented reality headset HoloLens. Demonstrations included the device streaming Netflix, Halo 5, and Candy Crush. A website has also launched for fans to submit their ideas for HoloLens apps to Microsoft.
That's better.
HoloLens is intended for a 2016 release. In Nintendo news, Nintendo has started allowing Japanese fans to register for their new account system simply called Nintendo Account. This service will be rolling out to other regions in the next few months. And finally, the Project M development team has announced that they are discontinuing development on their immensely popular mod for Super Smash Bros. Brawl, Project M. A representative from the team said that the decision to cease development after 6 years was due to the team wanting to work on new projects, not due to legal issues with Nintendo, owner of the Super Smash Bros. License. The mod has been downloaded over 3 million times, was designed to make Super Smash Bros. Brawl more competitive and more like its predecessors. It is now no longer available for download through official sources. For more breaking news, check out GamingBuzz.com. And now, back to our discussion.
Gaming Buzz. Grab our joysticks.
Next, we're going to talk about the Sega Saturn. Christian, what are your thoughts?
As far as I know, there was no Sonic the Hedgehog to begin with, which is usually a big seller or a launch title for Sega.
I think one of the biggest reasons why the Saturn did not make a huge dent in the gaming market was because Sega decided to rush the system out to try and beat out the PlayStation, since they knew that the PlayStation had arguably better hardware and was going to be cheaper. So they decided to push the launch date of the Sega Saturn back 4 months so that they could get it out early to try and get more people to buy it before the PlayStation came out.
And the Saturn was also considerably more expensive than the PlayStation 1, comparing the Saturn being $399 compared to the PS1 being $299.
One of the funniest moments in gaming history was when, at a expo, Sega went on stage and they had a half-an-hour presentation about the Sega Saturn and how amazing it was going to be. And that it was going to be $399 and it was coming out really soon. And then a representative from Sony came up on stage right afterwards. He went into the microphone and said $299 and walked off stage to enormous applause.
That is really funny.
We'll talk about a burn.
Yeah, I'm guessing the Sega employees were a little crestfallen after that event.
Maybe that's why the PlayStation 2 didn't get a lot of Sega games later in its lifetime, actually.
That's true. Once Sega stopped making consoles and started releasing their games for other systems, they really focused on Nintendo and Microsoft consoles and didn't have that many games on Sony platforms. Maybe they still had some spite left in them from that event.
But I think after they noticed that the PS2 started doing better, they probably put games there so they can also make a lot of money.
Yeah, and later in the lifespan of the PS2, I noticed that.
Do you think we should move on to Sega's other failure of a console?
Yes, let's talk about the Sega Dreamcast.
The Dreamcast is actually one of my favorite consoles of all time, and it was the second one I ever owned. And it was so ahead of its time that it baffles me that it failed.
I have to agree because it has very fantastic arcade ports on it.
Not only that, it was the first console ever to come standard with a modem.
That must have been really revolutionary, being able to go on the internet at blazing speeds of 200 and something kilobytes a second.
If that. It was all done through dial-up unless you bought a broadband adapter.
Which I'm guessing was very expensive back then.
I believe they launched at $199.
Well,
Also, the Dreamcast didn't have third-party support.
No, it did not. In fact, the Dreamcast is the only major video game console ever to not have an EA Sports title.
well, that is very interesting.
Yeah, EA refused to produce games for the Dreamcast due to poor sales and because they had a fallout with Sega over the Saturn.
I actually think that would have been my dream console back then because I absolutely despise most sports games.
Well, that's not to say that there weren't sports games on the Dreamcast. There were, but Sega had to produce them themselves since no one else was, which cost them a lot of money.
And they didn't end up flooding the system with them. Also, I think another reason that the Dreamcast didn't do too well is because the PS2 came out very shortly after.
The Dreamcast was on the market for 9 months, and it was really building up steam and was doing quite well. And then Sony announced that the PlayStation 2 was coming out, and the hype train rolled into station, and people went nuts over the supposed specs of the PS2, and the Dreamcast sales flatlined.
Also to mention, the Dreamcast launched in North America on 9/9/1999.
That's called good planning and good marketing.
They all hyped it up and everybody got super hyped about the Dreamcast too, just because of that date.
The future's here, right? Just like 1999, and then suddenly it's like 2000, PlayStation 2.
And next we're going to talk about the 3DO.
The 3DO is an enigma in gaming history because it's a console that on paper sounded amazing, but in practice ended up not going anywhere.
One of the problems that the 3DO had was its overly high price point.
Yeah, the 3DO launched with its cheap model at $700, which is absolutely insane, especially for 1993.
The way that they kind of dealt with these systems, it kind of reminds me of the Steam Machine model that we're seeing now from Valve.
That's right. Just like Valve is doing nowadays, the 3DO company did not make its own consoles. Rather, it licensed the rights to make those consoles to other companies. The problem with that was that all these other companies like Panasonic or Gold Star, who later became LG, had to make all of their profit off of the console itself, making them a lot more expensive than they should have been.
And not to mention it being expensive, they also broke very easily.
Yeah, the Gold Star model is infamously known for having a terrible CD tray, and the wires in it would just fry and kill your 3DO within weeks of buying one.
Many of the games on the system aren't really the best either. They either didn't run too well or they just didn't have the development behind them.
You know, it was an early 3D system, and because of that, there were definitely some limits to what it could do. But there were some really good games on it.
One of my favorite games series actually came out on the 3DO, Need for Speed.
Which was produced by EA. And the funny thing about that is the founder of the 3DO company was the CEO of EA. You know, one of the other games that is really good on the 3DO is Street Fighter 2. It's actually one of the best ports from the arcade, and it feels closest to the arcade experience.
Also, this system had very little third-party support.
That sounds like a common theme today. There really weren't that many companies developing for the 3DO, and most of them were new companies that were experimenting with the 3DO since there wasn't a big market for games on it.
So basically, most of all the consoles, one, they were expensive, two, they have a weird gimmick, and three, usually the third party doesn't really want to work with them.
That's about right.
And speaking of those things, the last console we're going to talk about is the Virtual Boy.
Oh man, how I love the Virtual Boy. all those great games, the screen resolution, and
You're joking, right?
of course not.
Man, this thing was more revolutionary than, let's say, virtual reality nowadays.
Okay, guys, let's be serious now. The Virtual Boy was one of the worst consoles ever made.
Or is it a console?
I don't know, maybe you could consider it a handheld system since you could technically move it around with you, but it had a separate controller and you'd look like a dork playing it anywhere but at home. So I'd probably say it was a console.
And the most ironic thing about the Virtual Boy is that it was made by the creator of the Game Boy, Gunpei Yokoi.
Yeah, the genius who brought us the Game Boy also made one of the worst consoles ever made, the Virtual Boy.
Which is weird though, because it's technically like a prototype console, which wasn't really developed correctly. It was most like rushed.
It had a pretty high price also for being a bit experimental. And having to always change the batteries in the thing.
It wouldn't really last that long because the battery use was so high on it. And the worst thing about it though is it would give you headaches.
Not just headaches. I played one for about 5 minutes at a convention, and I almost threw up.
I actually threw up from playing one.
Yeah, a console that makes you sick playing it. I think we don't have to discuss the Virtual Boy anymore. I think we know why it failed.
Well, we gotta say why it makes people sick. It's red and black screen only, which is not that good.
I think Nintendo had a secret agreement with the companies that make headache medication. That's all the time that we have for this week. We like to end each of our discussions with asking our hosts what game they're playing this week. What are you playing this week, Darien?
I'm going to be playing some Splatoon on my Wii U.
Oh, you mean the failure console?
Yep. It's not a failure in my eyes.
It is a good console to play, but it just didn't do that well. And what are you playing, Christian?
I'm gonna be playing Mega Man 3 on the NES. What can I say? I like shooting lemons.
You and your lemons, dude.
Are you going to bring some lemonade to our next meeting?
If I can get the right ingredients, then yes. Sure.
And me, I will be playing Super Mario Bros. 3 because Christian has challenged me to beat it, even though I'm terrible at platformers.
I'm telling you, get good at platforming.
I'm trying. I'm getting pretty far.
Hey, Christian, you should make him some practice courses in Mario Maker.
Oh, yeah, that's a great idea, actually.
I could use it. Don't forget to check out our website, gamingbuzz.com, to stay informed on when we're releasing future episodes. And be sure to follow us on Twitter at GamingBuzzPC. And be sure to like our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/GamingBuzzPodcast. And make sure to check out some of the other cool podcasts on the Newsmakers Podcast Network at npcn.tv. And as always, I'm Jacob.
I'm Darien.
And I'm Christian.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to Gaming Buzz. New episodes can be found on GamingBuzz.com. Don't forget to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and subscribe to our YouTube channel.